Ethan Carter had always believed that silence was a kind of language, one that revealed truths people rarely dared to speak. The quiet, dense forest that surrounded the new research base felt like a continuation of that belief. It was peaceful, but it held secrets. When he and his partner Clara moved to the edge of the wildlife preserve, he thought it would be a fresh beginning, a chance to mend what routine and distance had quietly damaged between them. But beginnings, he was learning, had a way of testing what was already fragile. Clara noticed the shift before Ethan did. The way his attention drifted during breakfast, the way he stared out at the misty horizon longer than necessary, as if waiting for something to appear. She tried to fill the silence with conversation, stories about the house, the neighbors, the endless unpacking, but his responses came slower each day. He wasn't cold, just absent, like someone walking through the research facility. Ethan found himself absorbed in a new assignment, an environmental study focused on the migratory behavior of forest mammals. It was the kind of work that demanded patience and observation, both qualities he possessed in abundance. When the project coordinator introduced a new field assistant, a volunteer from an environmental NGO in Kenya, Ethan hardly looked up at first. But when Malik Kato entered the room, something about the man's calm presence caught his attention. Malik was unlike anyone Ethan had worked with before. He was confident but not loud, his movements deliberate, his smile easy yet restrained. There was a steadiness about him that seemed to quiet the noise around him. During the briefing, he listened more than he spoke, nodding thoughtfully as though every detail carried weight. When their eyes met briefly across the table, Ethan felt something unspoken pass between them, a faint recognition, not of familiarity, but of intrigue. Over the next week, their paths crossed often. Malik assisted with data collection, sometimes joining Ethan in the lab to review samples or note field results. Their conversations began formally, technical, precise, but gradually drifted into personal territory. Malik spoke of his homeland, of dry seasons and green valleys, of how nature taught him patience. Ethan, in turn, found himself sharing small details about his own life, his love for the rain, his unease with crowds, his habit of collecting old maps. Clara noticed that he returned home later each evening. When she asked if the workload was heavy, Ethan simply nodded, adding that Malik was efficient and that the team's progress depended on long hours. She smiled politely but watched his face as he spoke, sensing that something had changed beneath his calm surface. The first real sign came a week later, during a team meeting. The institute announced an upcoming field assessment, a 3-day survival and observation exercise deep inside the jungle. 2-person teams would venture out to test their endurance and record nocturnal animal activity. Ethan volunteered immediately, surprising even himself with how quickly he raised his hand. When the coordinator asked for his chosen partner, he said Malik's name without hesitation. Later that night, Clara asked why he hadn't picked one of his longtime colleagues. Ethan shrugged. Malik's reliable. He's good in the field, he said, though even to himself, the words felt rehearsed. She said nothing more, only reached across the table to squeeze his hand. Her touch was warm, familiar, yet something inside him stayed distant, unreachable. In the days leading up to the expedition, Ethan felt an unfamiliar restlessness. He told himself it was the anticipation of the fieldwork, the challenge of navigating wild terrain. But beneath that reasoning pulsed a quieter truth, curiosity. He wanted to understand Malik beyond the polite exchanges and professional boundaries. There was a depth to him, a quiet confidence that drew Ethan closer, not through words but through presence. The morning of departure arrived with a mist that hung low over the trees. Clara helped him pack, folding his clothes neatly, slipping a small note into the side pocket of his bag. "For when you can't sleep," she said with a faint smile. Ethan kissed her forehead, thanked her softly, and promised to call once they returned. She watched from the porch as he loaded his gear into the truck, her hand raised in a wave that lingered long after he disappeared down the dirt road. The drive to the jungle was long, winding through narrow paths and forgotten villages. Malik sat beside him, occasionally pointing out a tree species or the tracks of a wild animal in the dust. Their conversation was sparse but comfortable. There was a rhythm between them, built not from familiarity but from a shared understanding of solitude. By the time they reached the forest base, the sun had dipped low, staining the sky in shades of gold and crimson. They unloaded their supplies, checked their equipment, and set up camp by a small river clearing. The sound of flowing water mingled with the distant calls of unseen creatures. Malik gathered wood for the fire while Ethan assembled the tent, their movements wordless yet synchronized. As the flames rose, Malik sat across from Ethan, his face illuminated by the orange light. He began to speak about his childhood, the sound of drums on nights of celebration, the scent of rain on dry earth. His voice carried warmth, unhurried, almost melodic. Ethan listened, drawn in by the simple honesty of it. When Malik asked about his life, Ethan hesitated before answering. He spoke of his city, his studies, his relationship with Clara, but his words felt thin, as if describing someone else's existence. The night deepened, the forest alive with whispers. A silence stretched between them, neither heavy nor awkward, just present. Malik looked into the fire, then at Ethan. "Sometimes," he said softly, "we go far to find what we were afraid to see close to home." Ethan didn't reply. The words lingered in his mind long after Malik turned away. He thought of Clara, of their quiet dinners, their unspoken distance, and wondered what he was truly searching for in this place. The forest around them seemed to pulse with unseen life. Crickets hummed, the river murmured, and the fire crackled in small bursts. Ethan felt both alone and understood in a way he couldn't name. It wasn't attraction he felt, not yet, but recognition, as though Malik's presence mirrored something hidden within himself. When he finally lay down inside the tent, the night air cool against his skin, he could still hear Malik moving outside, humming a faint tune in his native tongue. The melody faded slowly, leaving Ethan awake with thoughts that refused to quiet. Tomorrow, they would begin their test, 3 days alone in the wilderness. But even now, Ethan sensed that what awaited them wasn't merely a test of survival. It would be something deeper, quieter, and far more revealing. That he closed his eyes, listening to the forest breathe. The silence, once familiar, now carried a question he wasn't sure he wanted answered. Ethan woke to the sound of the city humming outside his window, a low, constant pulse that seemed to mirror the restless thoughts in his mind. The previous week's interactions with Julian replayed over and over, each glance and casual touch taking on new weight in his mind. He had never expected a roommate to feel so complicated, so compelling. Something about Julian's presence was magnetic, pulling at parts of him he had long kept controlled and cautious. That morning, Julian emerged from the kitchen with his usual easy confidence, carrying a steaming mug of coffee. "Morning," he said casually, though the way he leaned against the doorframe made the word feel layered, intimate. "Didn't hear you up earlier. Sleep well?" "Yeah," Ethan replied, trying to keep his tone even. "Just a little restless." Julian smirked knowingly. "City noises, huh? Or maybe you've got something on your mind." Ethan felt his cheeks warm, unsure if Julian was teasing or reading him with a precision that made him slightly uncomfortable. "Maybe both," he said cautiously, taking a sip of coffee to hide the flush. Julian leaned forward slightly, eyes glinting with curiosity. "You've got that look," he said. "Like you're thinking about something personal." Ethan froze, realizing he had been lost in thought about the previous night, the small request Julian had made, the subtle tension it created between them. He hadn't told anyone about it, he wasn't even sure he could explain it to himself. Yet Julian's gaze seemed to peer straight through his carefully maintained defenses. "Maybe," Ethan said, attempting a neutral tone. "Just a lot on my mind." Julian's expression softened, just a fraction. "Hey, don't worry. I'm not trying to pry. But I have to admit. I feel like we're in this odd space. You know, roommates, friends, maybe something more complicated than that." The words hung in the air, a challenge wrapped in casual delivery. Ethan's pulse quickened. Something in him wanted to step back, maintain boundaries, preserve the sense of order he so valued, but another part, a quieter, more daring part, felt drawn forward. The next afternoon, Julian approached him with an unusual level of openness. "So, about yesterday," he began, voice low and conversational. "I wanted to ask you again, can you help me with something?" Ethan raised an eyebrow, curiosity tinged with caution. "Something like before?" Julian nodded. "Yeah, kind of. I need an honest second opinion, and I thought, well, maybe you could help." His eyes were steady, almost vulnerable beneath the playful exterior. "I promise, nothing crazy. Just a favor between roommates." Ethan hesitated, the memory of the previous request flooding back. The thought of closeness with Julian made his chest tighten, a mixture of excitement and uncertainty that was difficult to name. "All right," he said slowly. "I'll help." Julian's smile was quick, fleeting, but it carried a warmth that made Ethan feel both reassured and strangely exposed. "Thanks, Ethan. Seriously." From that point, their days took on a subtle but noticeable shift. Even mundane tasks, making coffee, organizing the living room, walking to the nearby convenience store, felt charged with an unspoken tension. Julian had a way of speaking to Ethan that made him hyper-aware of every movement, every glance. He noticed the way Julian's hand lingered briefly when passing a notebook, or how his laughter seemed intentionally close, brushing against the edges of familiarity in a way that blurred boundaries. Ethan also noticed Julian's secrets more acutely now. Texts that he glanced at briefly, quickly dismissed, but their urgency left him with questions. Small inconsistencies in Julian's explanations, "just a friend," or "nothing important," suggested hidden layers to his life that Ethan couldn't yet decode. Curiosity battled with caution inside him. Every day brought a mix of intrigue, concern, and an undeniable pull towards something he was only beginning to recognize in himself. One evening, as rain tapped lightly against the window, Julian appeared at the sofa where Ethan was reading. "You ever wonder about trust?" he asked suddenly, voice low. The question was casual, almost philosophical, but the way Julian looked at him made it feel intimate, challenging. "Trust?" Ethan repeated, unsure how to respond. Julian nodded. "Yeah, between people. Some things are easy to share, others, not so much. But you know, when you trust someone, it changes everything." Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine. He realized that he was thinking about more than just trust, about connection, desire, the possibility that his feelings for Julian were evolving faster than he was prepared to acknowledge. Their conversation ended with a silence that was heavy but not uncomfortable. Silence, in this apartment, had become a language of its own, speaking volumes about what was unsaid but strongly felt. Ethan knew that he was walking a line between curiosity and restraint, desire and ethical boundaries. And yet, he couldn't bring himself to step back. Days passed, and Ethan's awareness of Julian's subtle cues only deepened. A casual brush of the arm, a playful challenge in a conversation, a lingering look at the edge of a smile, they were small, seemingly innocent actions, yet they carried a weight he could not ignore. He found himself analyzing every word, every gesture, wondering if Julian's intentions were truly casual, or if there was something more beneath the surface. One night, while Julian was out briefly, Ethan noticed a text pop up on Julian's phone left on the counter. He hesitated, conflicted, but curiosity overcame caution. The message was brief, cryptic: "Can't wait to see you tonight. Keep it just between us." Ethan felt a pang of something he couldn't name, surprise, confusion, a strange ache of betrayal, or perhaps a warning of complexity yet to come. Julian's private life, once opaque and distant, now seemed tantalizingly close, pressing against the edges of Ethan's carefully maintained boundaries. By the end of the week, Ethan understood one thing clearly: life in this apartment would never be ordinary. Julian had a way of drawing him in, of twisting everyday moments into exercises of tension, curiosity, and unspoken possibility. There was a thrill in it, yes, but also a precariousness, a sense that every choice carried weight and consequence. As Ethan lay awake that night, the faint city lights shimmering through the window, he realized he was at a crossroads. He could retreat into the familiar, maintaining his walls and routines, or he could allow himself to step closer to Julian's orbit, where trust, desire, and hidden truths awaited. And though he did not yet know what the right choice was, he knew that by morning, the rhythm of the apartment, and his heart, would be irrevocably changed. The rain had stopped by dawn, leaving the air clear and cold. Ethan stood outside for a while, watching the slow drift of mist along the hedges, trying to shake the strange restlessness that had settled over him. Inside, the sound of a kettle boiling broke the silence, followed by Daniel's steady movements in the kitchen. Liam was still asleep, his door closed. Ethan lingered in the hallway before finally stepping inside the kitchen. Daniel glanced up from the counter, his usual calm expression softening into something that looked almost welcoming. "Couldn't sleep?" Daniel asked. Ethan shook his head. "I guess I'm not used to quiet houses." Daniel smiled faintly. "You'll learn to appreciate it with age." He set a mug of coffee in front of Ethan, then leaned back against the counter. There was no tension in his voice, only a quiet ease that made Ethan's chest tighten. They talked about small things at first: college, work, the weather. But gradually, the conversation shifted, guided by the unspoken curiosity that had begun to form between them. Daniel asked questions in a way that felt deliberate but not invasive, as though he genuinely wanted to understand Ethan, not just fill the silence. Ethan found himself answering more honestly than he expected. "Sometimes," he said, tracing the rim of his mug, "I feel like I'm just going through the motions. I'm doing everything I'm supposed to, but I'm not sure why." Daniel's eyes lifted to meet his. "That feeling doesn't go away with age," he said quietly. "You just learn to live around it." The words lingered. There was no advice in them, no attempt to fix anything, just recognition. Ethan felt oddly seen in that moment, in a way that unsettled him more than comforted him. When Liam finally came down, the moment dissolved into ordinary noise, toast popping, laughter returning, Daniel stepping back into the role of polite father. But something had changed between him and Ethan. A quiet understanding had taken root, fragile and unspoken. Later that afternoon, Liam left to meet some friends, leaving Ethan behind. Daniel offered to drive him into town, but Ethan declined, saying he needed a little air. He walked instead, following a narrow path that led through the woods behind the house. The trees were still damp from the rain, their branches dripping onto the path. Half an hour later, he heard footsteps behind him. When he turned, Daniel was there, hands in his pockets, smiling faintly. "Didn't mean to follow," he said. "I just needed the same air, I suppose." Ethan smiled back, though his pulse quickened. They walked together without speaking for a while, the sound of leaves crunching beneath their shoes filling the silence. "You and Liam seem close," Daniel said eventually. "Yeah," Ethan replied. "He's one of the few people who doesn't try to make me someone else." Daniel nodded. "That's rare. Most friendships fade when people realize who you really are." Ethan glanced at him, unsure how to respond. "Does that happen to you?" Daniel hesitated, then said, "More often than I'd like to admit." They reached a clearing where the sunlight broke through in thin strips of gold. Daniel stopped, looking out over the quiet landscape. "Marriage teaches you a lot about silence," he said after a moment. "About pretending everything's fine when it isn't." Ethan's stomach tightened. He wanted to ask why he was telling him this, but the words stuck in his throat. Daniel looked at him, his gaze steady but not intense this time, just open. "Don't mistake me," he said. "I'm not unhappy. Just tired of pretending that's the same thing as being content." There was no accusation in his tone, no self-pity. It was simply the truth, laid bare. Ethan felt a flicker of empathy that bordered on something deeper. "I think people settle," Ethan said softly. "Not because they stop wanting more, but because they stop believing they deserve it." Daniel's lips curved faintly. "That's a wise thing to say for someone your age." Ethan shrugged. "Maybe I've just seen enough people give up." For a moment, their eyes met again, and Ethan saw the weight behind Daniel's calmness, a quiet loneliness that felt both familiar and foreign. The kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being alone, but from being unseen. They walked back in silence, both aware of what was growing between them but unwilling to name it. By the time they reached the house, the light had begun to fade. That evening, Liam called to say he'd be staying at a friend's place overnight. Ethan didn't react, though he felt the atmosphere shift immediately. The house seemed too large, the walls too quiet. Daniel prepared a simple dinner, insisting Ethan join him. Over the meal, conversation drifted easily again. Daniel asked about Ethan's parents, his plans, his fears. Ethan found himself revealing things he rarely told anyone, his doubts, his longing for something genuine, his confusion about where he fit in the world. Daniel listened without interruption, eyes thoughtful, expression unreadable. When dinner ended, they lingered at the table, neither ready to leave. Daniel finally said, "You remind me of myself when I was younger. Except you have the courage to admit what I couldn't." Ethan looked up. "And what was that?" "That I was lonely," Daniel said simply. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, it was full, almost heavy. Ethan felt words forming in his chest, but before he could speak, Daniel stood, clearing the table. "It's getting late," he said quietly. "You should rest." Ethan nodded, though part of him didn't want the moment to end. As he turned to leave, Daniel's voice stopped him. "Ethan." He turned back. Daniel's eyes held his, steady and calm. "Thank you for listening," he said. "Not everyone does." Ethan didn't know what to say, so he only nodded. But as he walked down the hallway, he could still feel Daniel's gaze following him, not heavy, not prying, just there. That night, Ethan lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The air felt charged with something he couldn't name. His thoughts circled back to Daniel, his restraint, his sadness, the quiet sincerity in his words. Ethan felt drawn to it, not out of curiosity, but out of understanding. He knew what it was to hide behind composure. His phone buzzed suddenly, startling him. The message was short, simple. "Daniel, can we talk privately before you leave tomorrow?" Ethan stared at the screen, the soft glow lighting the room. His pulse quickened, though he didn't know why. There was nothing inappropriate in the message, yet it felt like the threshold of something delicate, something dangerous. That he typed a brief reply, "Sure." Setting the phone aside, he turned off the light, lying back in the dark. Outside, the rain began again, gentle, steady, familiar. But inside, everything felt different. That he didn't know what Daniel wanted to say, or what he might confess. He only knew that tomorrow, something between them would change forever, and as he drifted into uneasy sleep, the thought returned like a quiet whisper: maybe this story wasn't about being wanted. Maybe it was about being seen.